They think the war is over. But they're dead wrong.
A forebearer of the shooter franchise, it's been decades since we've seen an iteration, but very soon we will jump in a familiar world of Wolfenstein with Wolfenstein: The New Order. To give you all the goodies, we have Andreas öjerfors, senior gameplay designer at MachineGames, all the way from Sweden to talk to us on the show. Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it has been a really long time since players have had a chance to play a new Wolfenstein game. What can players expect when they pick up The New Order?
Well, Wolfenstein: The New Order is a story-driven first-person action adventure. So it's a slightly different thing than what you've seen before with Wolfenstein, I think. So we've set it in the 1960s in an alternate history timeline where the Nazis won World War II and have now taken over and enslaved the world into fascism. So it's, the frantic action of old, but it's also drama and history and mystery. So it's not a one-note thing. It's what we hope to be a very varied experience.
From a narrative standpoint, I know that's a big focus this time around. Who are we playing as? And without giving too much away, what will our main character essentially be doing in this new alternative history?
Well, what he'll be doing most of is shooting Nazis. But you'll be playing B.J. Blazkowicz, which is the hero of the previous Wolfenstein games, all the way back to Wolfenstein 3D. So early on in the game, you start in the 1940s at the very end of the war, and somehow BJ ends up in a coma, and he wakes up in the 1960s from that coma and realizes then that, the war is lost and the world has been enslaved by the Nazis, and that, his country's lost. He's no longer a soldier in a war because the war is lost, and he has to kind of find his footing in this new world and try to figure out what happened. And because he will always be a soldier at heart, he tries to find out how can he continue the fight, basically. How can he continue to be the soldier that he is?
What are you really doing to make sure this game stands out? When you jump into, that first-person shooter market, I know Wolfenstein has some grand history in that, but the market's pretty saturated. What is your hook? What makes this game the one that I want to pick up out of all the other shooters that, at least on surface, look very similar?
Well, one of the favorite things for me about the game is how we try to combine the best of old-school shooter design with the best of, modern day shooter design. We, in the beginning of the project, went back and looked at, Wolfenstein 3D, because in a way this is our love letter to Wolf and its older games as well, or Doom and all those games. So we looked at what those games did, and we realized that there are some things that were kind of left behind, some design philosophies and design ideas that were kind of left behind by modern day designers. So we kind of took the best of that and we brought that into 2014 and said, how can we combine this with modern design sensibilities? And from that, I think we've created something quite unique and pretty cool. Yeah.
What are some of those design elements that have kind of fallen by the wayside?
Well, one of the focus we have is on this very frantic and fast-paced combat. This is not a game where you're going to hide behind a cover for a long time, and we have a completely optional cover system if you want to do that, but you're not going to stay behind a cover for a long time. This is a game you want to stay mobile in. You want to move around. You want to get behind the enemy. You want to flank the enemy, and you don't want him to be able to flank you and flush you out. So it's a very kinetic and fast-paced game in that way. So that's one of the more old-school elements that we've brought back.
Now, I do know that you're offering a lot of options. I have spent a little time with the game, and in the New Order, you have, again, a very strong run-and-gun focus, but there are some more nuanced approaches, a little bit more stealth elements, correct?
Right. Well, we want the player to be able to kind of play the game the way he wants to. So you will be able to just run around, dual wield basically any weapon in the game and just cause mayhem. And you can also take a stealth route and try to stealth kill and get past enemies that way. And you can also play it more tactically like a more modern-day shooter where you utilize combat and you flank the enemy and you play in that way. So it's going to be pretty open to the player how he wants to play this game.
Now, a game like this that focuses on that great run and gun, if you so choose, got to know about the weapons. What kind of weapons are we going to be using? Is there going to be kind of a futuristic tinge on it, or are these going to be more traditional 1960s weaponry?
Well, you start out in the 1940s, and at the very start there you have basic 1940s World War II weaponry, and you will have that with you throughout the game. But when you go into the 1960s, and this is part of the mystery of the game, because somehow the Nazis have acquired very powerful technology, and this is how they won World War II. So that's part of the mystery, trying to find out how did they acquire this technology. So the player will, of course, be able to wield that technology as weapons himself with, everything from, high-powered sniper rifles to laser miniguns and lots of fun stuff like that.
What's your favorite weapon to use? What's the one that gets the most carnage?
I'm in love with our shotgun. I've always said that my favorite shotgun is the pump-action shotgun from Doom 1.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, I've always been in love. I think I have a new favorite, and that's our 1960s shotgun, especially when you have two of those. It's just a meat grinder, basically.
And also, a really cool thing when I did play the game, that they do have a really interesting sense of irony and comedy. When a situation, of course, there's some great, amazingly powerful narrative moments, but there were some instances where you were, at least in my experience, touting those two shotguns, and just the one-liners that are coming from the protagonist were absolutely hilarious. From a narrative standpoint, where do you guys flirt with that line of finding the comedy in this story and also finding the drama?
It's a great question, and it's always been a question of balance, because we have this darker, quite serious narrative we want to tell, and then you're still in this twisted and kind of quirky version of the Nazis and their world and their history, and we want to have a sense of humor about it as well. So it's been kind of a balance between those two very different approaches to world building, I think, that we have tried to put inside the same game. It's something we like to compare to Inglourious Bastards in a way, the Tarantino movie, because he is a master at being able to take the very powerful moments and very powerful scenes, and then switch to something more lighthearted and fun, kind of. So we've tried to create that same blend of those two approaches, and it's something that's been a question of balance and trying to find the right tone throughout the project.
What are some of the instances where you have hit? Like, could you share, without giving obviously too much away, because from what I've seen, this story looks like it's going to be a powerful one. But is there an instance in the narrative where something, you really had that comedy, where you were almost gut-busting, laughing at something, and also, to the inverse of that, a really tense and dramatically resonating moment? Are there any of those that you could share with us?
Oh, boy. I'm not sure I want to go into and reveal any of those powerful emotional moments, because they will lose in power if I talk about them here when the player actually goes through it himself.
Maybe the funny moments, though?
Sorry?
Maybe some of the funny moments, perhaps?
Well, one thing that we saw a lot of people enjoy was when BJ realizes in a museum setting that is basically shooting apart completely, he realizes that the Nazis went to the moon. He sees this from the museum, and he has a one-liner that is basically, "Fuck you, moon." And we have seen a lot of people laugh at that. And that's a question of balance again. Is that too much? Is that not too much?
Depending on your play style, how long could the New Order game be? How long can you get through it?
I think the average is about 15 hours. So you could rush it and go through it quicker. But this is also a game about exploration, because it's a tribute to Wolfenstein CD, so it's also about exploration. So you can certainly extend it beyond that as well. But I'd say about 15 hours. So for a first-person shooter, I think it's a pretty damn long game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the follow-up to my next question. What are you doing to ensure that that 15 hours really feels like a progression of a story where it isn't just the same experience of when you start to when you end? What are you doing to make sure that players are still attached for such a long single-player experience in a first-person shooter?
Well, to a big degree, the game is about BJs and the players, because they basically know nothing about this new world. It's about their journey, finding out what happened, what it means to be part of this world, what it means to live in this world. You're meeting a lot of civilians, trying to figure out what happened to them and how their lives are today. So it's a long narrative about discovering the nature and the reality of this new order.
How much interaction does the player have in that narrative? How much of a choice will we have in how the story progresses, or are we there with already an established character who's on his own path and we're there for the ride?
Well, what we wanted to do is allow the player to express himself to how he approaches the gameplay, how he wants to play the game, and how he wants to beat the gameplay challenges and defeat the Nazis. We wanted to spend a lot of time and focus on defining BJ as a character ourselves, because BJ Blazkowicz has been not a very deep character in the previous games, I'd say. We wanted him, for the sake of the narrative we wanted to tell about this new world and discovering what this new world is about, we wanted to kind of flesh him out. So we spent a lot of time on figuring out who is BJ and what has this change to everything he knows about the world. How has that changed him?
Mm-hmm. And do you think that you've been able to reach that height, that you've been able to make that experience that gives us a little more insight into this character? And, you know, are there moments that you think we're able to get to that emotional resonance?
Oh, I certainly think so. I mean, that's been a big part of our motivation with working with this character and working on the narrative and the storytelling that we do within the world itself. So that's been one of our main motivations for the character, I think.
Well, I cannot wait for it. Thank you again so much for joining the program and telling us a little bit more about Wolfenstein, The New Order. What do you hope players get from Wolfenstein, The New Order? What do you hope they walk away with once they finish that experience?
I think it's going to be very different for different people, for different kinds of players. I think some people will certainly enjoy what we think is a powerful narrative. Other players will love exploring this Nazi-conquered world and figuring that out, and others will simply just enjoy the fast-paced, frantic action, I think. So I think it's going to be very different for different people.
Absolutely. When can we pick it up, and for what consoles?
I think it's the 20th of May, and it's for PC, PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, and Xbox 360 and Xbox One.
Pretty much everything. Well, thank you again. We had Andreas öjerfors, the senior gameplay designer on Wolfenstein: The New Order. Make sure you pick it up. This is Andy Borkowski, VGS.